Make sure you guys are subscribed and you also hit the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Subscribe to Next Up and all of its members. Hi guys, it's Splash and Crash here with another video, and in today's video we are going to be going over the top 5 players at every position who never reached their full potential. Also, stay tuned because I'm probably going to upload the next part of my top 50 players in the NBA right now list. So be sure you have hit the notification bell so you will be notified when that comes out. Anyways, let's get started. The first position we have is the point guard position, and the first player we have for the point guard position is Pete Maravich. Pete Maravich is probably like one of the most accomplished of all of these players in this video, but his career did end due to injury and another factor. So Pete Maravich in the 70s was one of the best scorers in the NBA for the Hawks and the Utah Jazz. He was in college, he averaged 40 points a game, and if there was a three-point line, he would have probably averaged like 60 or 70 points a game, because Pete Maravich was basically like Steph Curry in the 70s, and he was an incredible passer. And in like 1978, he got injured, and while he was injured, the Jazz made a coaching change because he was on the Jazz at the time, and when he came back, the new coach had a grudge against him because Pete Maravich destroyed this new coach's team in college. So the new coach had a grudge against him and benched Pete Maravich. Then he got really upset, but the owners didn't want to fire this new coach. So then so it was just a very toxic locker room. Then Pete got injured again, which this injury basically ended his career. He got traded to the Celtics, and while he was on the Celtics, he got another injury, and then he retired. But if Pete Maravich didn't get that other injury, then the Celtics could have had him and Larry Bird, plus Kevin McHale and Robert Parrish for most of the 80s. Pete Maravich would retire in the late 80s probably, but they would still probably win way more rings with another Hall of Famer. The next point guard is Michael Ray Richardson. Larry Bird and Magic Johnson both thought he was going to be the best player ever, because at the beginning of the 80s he had an okay rookie season, but he had an incredible second season and third season for the Knicks. But then the Knicks traded his two best friends, and he also got into substance abuse problems. So yeah, he was getting consistently suspended. He also got multiple injuries, and his career started going downward from there until his second to last season, which this was a fluke season, but he averaged 21 points and 10 assists for the Nets out of nowhere. That was his best season, and the next season he went back to being not star player. But for that one season, we got to see a small glimpse of what Michael Ray Richardson could have become. Next we have Penny Hardaway. Shaquille O'Neal and Penny Hardaway were the NBA's best dynamic duo at the beginning of the 90s and up until 1996, because and this really shows how close the Magic were to being the next great franchise, because there have been many missed opportunities in the history of the Orlando Magic. They made the finals in their 6th year as a franchise. In the middle of the 90s, they beat Michael Jordan in 1995 in the playoffs, and they almost they got so close to winning the championship, but they ended up running into Hakeem Olajuwon in his best season. And but in 1996, the Magic, they made probably the biggest mistake in their franchise's history, and this is probably the mistake that led to them just being a regular franchise and not a Celtics or Lakers level franchise, which I think they could have become. They refused to give Shaquille O'Neal the max contract. So obviously he was very upset about this because he was arguably the best center in the entire NBA at that point. And then he went to the Lakers. But so they at least had Penny Hardaway, right? But in the next season, Penny got a really, really, really bad leg injury that would completely ruin his career and just made him a regular role player. He was still a great role player because he was 6'7", but he was like, he was getting Magic Johnson and Michael Jordan comparisons before that. So this injury really ruined his career, and I think there would have been a lot less pressure on Penny, and you wouldn't have to carry the team if they kept Shaq. So Penny might not have been injured, and they might have had the best dynamic duo ever. The next point guard is Derrick Rose. Derrick Rose, up until the 2012 playoffs, was looking like he was going to be the face of the league in the future. In 2011, he was able to steal the MVP away from LeBron James, and he became the youngest MVP in NBA history. He also led the Bulls to a better record than the Heat, who had LeBron James, Dwayne Wade, and Chris Bosh. And he also came really close to beating the Heat in the conference finals, but ended up coming up short. In the 2012 playoff, in the 2012 season, he dealt with a few injuries throughout the season, but they were nothing major. But in the playoffs, this is when his career really fell off. In the first round against the 76ers, so at the end of the game, usually people bench their star players so they don't get injured if they're up by a lot of points. But for some reason, the Bulls didn't bench Derrick Rose at the end of the game, and he went out for a layup, and then he fell down and tore his ACL. His Achilles. And this completely ruined his career. He never was even remotely close to what he used to be. This season, in 2020, he's having a bit of a comeback, but it's not at the MVP Hall of Fame level that we thought he could have been. Next, finally, we have Deron Williams. At the beginning of the 2010s and in the late 2000s, Deron Williams was the second best point guard in the NBA. He was one of the top 3 point guards in the NBA. At one point, I do think he passed Steve Nash, but yeah, basically, he was competing with Chris Paul for the title of best point guard in the NBA as well. Chris Paul was better, but Deron Williams wasn't far off. And the Utah Jazz were doing really well because they had Deron Williams and Carlos Boozer. And they even made a conference finals where they lost to the Spurs. But then Deron Williams went to the Nets, and he was still an all-star on the Nets. But he started to deal with some injuries, and then they made that horrible trade for Kevin Garnett and Paul Pierce, and Deron Williams, he had to play a completely different style. He wasn't getting as many touches. He was started to fall off, and the chemistry in that locker room was just really bad because they had way too many egos who were out of their prime and thought they could still lead the team. And ultimately, Deron Williams fell off, became a regular role player, and ended up retiring recently. Next, we have the shooting guard position, and the first player in the shooting guard position is Tracy McGrady. T-Mac was a combination of injuries, bad luck, and a bit of choking, but not that much. So Tracy McGrady, he started his career on the Raptors with his cousin Vince Carter, who we will be talking about in a few minutes. Tracy McGrady, he was coming off the bench, and Toronto is obviously in Canada, so in the 1999 offseason, I believe, he decided to go to the Orlando Magic, which is in Florida. After his career ended, he said this was the biggest mistake of his life because he thought that him and Vince Carter could have been one of the best dynamic duos in the NBA, which I do agree with. But anyways, once he went to the Magic, he became the most improved player, and he was averaging like 32 points a game, leading the league in scoring. And yeah, so but his team was horrible, and so the Magic almost signed Tim Duncan, which would have been great for his career, but Doc Rivers messed it up when they were meeting with Tim Duncan. But the Magic also signed Grant Hill, who we will be talking about, but injuries completely ruined Grant Hill, so T-Mac was basically alone on the Magic. And yeah, in the playoffs, they were consistently losing the first round, and Tracy McGrady often did bad in Game 7s, but it was like, but it wasn't entirely his fault because all the pressure was on him due to there being no even remotely good players around him. And he ended up going to the Rockets, where his injury issues started to really come in, and yeah, his career ended with the San Antonio Spurs as a bench warmer. Tracy McGrady was getting Michael Jordan comparisons before this, and he was really on the same level as Kobe Bryant before all those injuries and bad luck. Next we have Brandon Roy. His teammate Greg Oden is also in this video, but Brandon Roy and Greg Oden, they both fell off due to one thing: injuries. And that was Blazers team in the late 2000s and early 2010s probably could have competed for a title if they both were able to stay healthy. Kobe Bryant said Brandon Roy was the best offensive player in the league, and yeah, Brandon Roy in his first 4 seasons made 3 All-Star teams and won a Rookie of the Year, made 2 All-NBA second teams, and was consistently leading the Blazers to the second round or third round in the playoffs. When Brandon Roy, Marcus Aldridge, and Greg Oden all played together and were healthy, they had an amazing 53-12 record. But due to them most of the time not being healthy, they rarely got to play together and got to show how good they could have really been. Brandon Roy had superstar potential, and I think could have been a second ballot Hall of Famer if he didn't get injured. And he would probably also have 1 or 2 championships if Greg Oden didn't get injured. Next we have Vince Carter. Vince is probably the most unique case on this list because unlike everyone else, there was no injuries, no substance abuse, nothing like that. It was just pure bad luck and horrible management. So the Raptors made Tracy McGrady really unhappy. For some reason, put him on the bench instead of putting him at point guard or small forward. That was a really bad move. They also didn't do anything to comfort Tracy McGrady, so they lost T-Mac. And yeah, they overall just did a horrible management with Vince Carter, so he eventually left for the Nets to play with Jason Kidd, but Jason Kidd was getting old, and that didn't go anywhere. So by the time he left the Nets, he was 31 or 32. He went to the Magic after they made their finals run, but they weren't able to win. This was after T-Mac left the Magic, and if T-Mac stayed with the Magic, they would have also had Dwight Howard, which could have been a great dynamic duo. But basically, he left the Magic. Vince Carter then left the Magic, and he just became a journeyman towards the end of his career. And he's still in the NBA, astonishingly, even though he was out of his prime 10 years ago. He's still playing. He's 43 years old, and he has played the most seasons in NBA history. If basically Vince Carter had nothing to do with injuries, there was never like a good team around him. And next we have David Thompson. David Thompson, Michael Jordan. David Thompson was Michael Jordan's inspiration. Michael Jordan modeled his game after David Thompson. David Thompson was a 6'4" player with a 50-inch vertical. Yeah, a 50-inch vertical. Vertical leap wasn't recorded back then, so it's not official. But like, if he had that 50-inch vertical was true, which there's actually video evidence which suggests it's true, that means that he could touch the rim at only 6'4". Not the rim. He could touch the top of the backboard at only 6'4". That is incredible. He was also really gifted at shooting, and like, even though there was no three-point line back then, he often took shots from where the three-point line would have been. And yeah, he was really good on defense too. And he made 3 consecutive All-NBA first team in his first 3 seasons. Yes, he made All-NBA first team in his rookie season. He was absolutely incredible, but then due to substance abuse and injuries, he completely fell off. And he peaked at 22 years old. If David Thompson stayed healthy, he would have had multiple All-Stars around him with those early 80s Nuggets teams. Those Nuggets teams were incredibly fast-paced and just missed one thing: defense. And if they had a bit more star power plus a really good defender, I think they could have made multiple finals runs, because they were winning 50 games without David Thompson. Finally, we have Reggie Lewis, who, along with Len Bias, who we will talk about in like 30 seconds. Reggie Lewis died while he was on the Celtics, but unlike Len Bias, he did get to play a few seasons, and he showed us that he could have been a star. He made an all-star team in the season before he died, and then he got a heart attack and died on the court. If Reggie Lewis and Len Bias both stayed alive, they would have probably, yeah, I'll get into it when we get to Len Bias, but Reggie Lewis could have probably been one of the best shooting guards in the NBA. And yeah, so let's get on to the small forwards and Len Bias. So we're on to the small forwards, and if you look in the middle, the player in the middle, that is Len Bias. He's in a Maryland jersey because even though he was drafted by the Celtics, he never got to play a game due to a cocaine OD. And yeah, if Len Bias stayed alive in his first season with the Celtics, they probably would have won the championship, because the reason why they didn't is because Larry Bird and Kevin McHale got injured due to so much pressure being on them to come back. And they also aggravated those injuries when they wanted to come back and help their team win. And they played through those injuries. Len Bias could have taken a lot of pressure off them. They could have stayed healthy. And those injuries that Kevin McHale and Larry Bird had basically ended their career. I think Len Bias could have stopped that. And plus, if you add another like Michael Jordan level player, which Len Bias was probably going to be due to how well he was playing in college, then I think they get over the Lakers. And yeah, if him and Reggie Lewis stayed alive, that's 2 more Hall of Famers, plus Larry Bird and Kevin McHale still have a few more All-Star seasons in them. I think that gets past Michael Jordan, the Bulls, maybe Isaiah Thomas and the Pistons a few times. And overall, it just makes the Celtics incredible franchise that much more better. And okay, now the first player you see all the way on the left, that is Jerry Stackhouse. He, along with Grant Hill, could have formed one of the best dynamic duos in the NBA, but he fell off due to injury. He started his career on the Sixers, but with Allen Iverson, but he got into problems with the management, so he was traded to the Pistons. And while on the Pistons, he spent a season with Grant Hill, but the next season Grant Hill left for the Magic. And if Grant Hill and Jerry Stackhouse stayed together, I think that could have been an incredible team if they were both able to stay healthy. But the next season, Jerry Stackhouse would truly show how good he could have been, because he averaged 29 points a game in his 4th or 5th season, which is incredible. and he was looking like he was going to be one of the best scorers in the NBA, but then he fell off due to injuries. And yeah, there's a lot of injury-related stories on this list, but yeah, the next one we have is Andrew Wiggins, and this is probably like top 2 most odd one on this entire list. And Andrew Wiggins, because he had no injuries, like he had a good team around him. He had Jimmy Butler and Karl Anthony Towns. He had all the athleticism, all the skill. What made him fall off was that he was just too soft. He didn't have the mentality to be a superstar. He was looking like the next Kobe Bryant or Michael Jordan at the beginning of his career. Then I guess Jimmy Butler just completely ruined his confidence, because Jimmy Butler is a very intense player, and it showed us that Andrew Wiggins didn't have what it takes to be a superstar. Next, we have Grant Hill. Grant Hill was really looking like the next Michael Jordan, but I think a more accurate comparison for him would be LeBron James. Before 1999, Grant Hill was looking like the next great superstar. At like 22 or 23 and 24, he was the best small forward in the game, and he was going insane. He was an incredible passer, great rebounder, and just good at literally everything, just like LeBron James. And he was absolutely elite, and Michael Jordan thought him or Penny Hardaway could be the next face of the league. But they didn't do that, because Grant Hill got some really bad leg injury that completely ruined his career. He made like a few more All-Star teams, but that was due to his popularity and not due to him having good seasons. And yeah, he's just another case of injuries, not letting a player reach their full potential. And finally, the last small forward we have is probably the weirdest case in this entire video, Andrei Kirilenko. So the first part about him, like after John Stockton and Karl Malone retired, he became an all-star. He could do literally everything. He was probably the best defender in the NBA, because he was an elite perimeter defender. He was one of the best inside defenders too. He could guard literally every single player in the league except probably Shaq. And yeah, he was going insane. But then what happened is the Jazz added 3 more All-Stars: Carlos Boozer, Darren Williams, and Mehmet Okur. And before that, Andrei Kirilenko was able to lead them to like the conference finals. And the Jazz were still really good as a team, but Kirilenko then had to come off the bench, and which made like a lot of problems with his coaches. And also, he stopped focusing on basketball so he could play World of Warcraft. Yeah, you heard me right. So that means that his career basically ended due to chemistry problems and playing World of Warcraft. What? Okay, so he had all the potential in the world to be an NBA superstar, and he couldn't reach that potential because he played World of Warcraft. I think that's just crazy. And yeah, let's get on to the power forwards. This video looks like it's going to be really long, so let's just get on to the power forwards and get through it a bit more quicker through the power forwards and centers. So the first power forward we have is Ralph Sampson, who is the tallest power forward of all time, standing at 7'4", and he should have formed probably the greatest front court in NBA history with Hakeem Olajuwon. And like, he was so good that the Rockets refused to trade for Ralph Sampson to the Trailblazers for the second pick in the 1984 draft, and Clyde Drexler. They could have used that second pick for Michael Jordan, so they basically declined Ralph Sampson for Michael Jordan and Clyde Drexler. Yeah, they were really young, and obviously they should have taken that trade, but like at the time, it seemed like the right move, because Ralph Sampson came off his rookie season where he averaged like 24 and 13 with like 2.8 blocks a game or something as a rookie. And so they thought they could form an incredible dynamic duo, which they did with Hakeem Olajuwon. This team was able to get to the finals just 3 years later. Both of them were 24 and 23 respectively. But then Ralph Sampson got a lot of injuries, which is common for people of his size, and his career ended. and is probably one of the biggest what-ifs in NBA history. Next, we have Blake Griffin, which you guys might be surprised to see him on this list because Blake Griffin has been a great player in the past 10 years. But like he hasn't progressed at all since his rookie season because his rookie season he averaged 22 points and 13 rebounds. Due to injuries, he could just never progress and just stay at a regular all-star level and never reach that Hall of Fame level that we thought he had. Thought he could become. Next, we have Michael Beasley, who, he just didn't have the work ethic. He was looking like the next Carmelo Anthony, and he was legitimately giving Derrick Rose, a fight for the number 1 pick. He was drafted by the Heat to be Dwayne Wade's second option, but he just didn't have the work. He also got into substance abuse problems. And so he was a decent scorer throughout his career, but he could just never reach the star potential that we thought he had. Next we have Chris Webber, who at his peak was legitimately getting Kevin Garnett, Dirk Nowitzki, and Tim Duncan a run for their money. This Chris Webber, those Kings teams in the early 2000s, they could just, due to some horrible refereeing, they couldn't reach the finals, and they probably would have won it if they got to the finals, because the Nets weren't that good. And, Chris Webber, after that, he got a lot of injuries and just couldn't reach, because, his peak probably could have been, a Dirk Nowitzki, Kevin Garnett, Tim Duncan, Karl Malone level. He could have probably been in that conversation for the greatest power forward of all time. Finally, we have Amar'e Stoudemire, who, just like Chris Webber, was a superstar level player, but just never could reach the greatest power forward of all time level. He was basically the next Karl Malone. I think if Amar'e Stoudemire reached his peak, he would be like a faster, modern-day Karl Malone. Yeah, that's how good this man was. But ultimately, due to injuries, he fell off and could never... If he stayed healthy, the Knicks would probably have another championship because him, Stephon Marbury, and Carmelo Anthony would have formed an incredible big three. Guys, we are so close to being done. The last position we have is the centers, and the first center we have is Alonzo Mourning. At his peak, Alonzo Mourning was he was really underrated. He was probably the most underrated player of the 90s, and he was giving Shaq a fight. Shaq wasn't able to dominate him like anyone else, and Alonzo Mourning won 3 Defensive Player of the Years. He was a super strong offensive player, and those Heat teams were the 1 seed. The Heat at their peak probably could have beat the Michael Jordan Bulls because they were actually the 1 seed instead of the Bulls. And Alonzo Mourning, but he had to retire due to heart issues, but at his peak he was an incredible 2-way player. He was super strong, and he was like a mini Shaq. Next we have Brad Daugherty, and him along with Mark Price formed a very underrated Cavs team in the late 80s and early 90s. But Brad Daugherty got injuries, and that team also had Larry Nance, and those 3 players formed a great big 3 and were just a really solid team overall. But Brad Daugherty could never reach his potential due to injuries. Next we have Bill Walton, who he is, other than Derrick Rose, the only MVP on this list. And he also was able to lead the Blazers to a championship before he went down with injuries. If he stayed healthy, he probably could have been the greatest center of all time because he is already considered a top 10 center in some people's eyes. Next we have Greg Oden, who he was picked before Kevin Durant, and he was people actually agreed with that pick because he was like Alonzo Mourning, a mini Shaq. He was not as good offensively, but he was a monster on the defensive end. And like I said, when him, Brandon Roy and LaMarcus Aldridge were all healthy. The Blazers won 53-12 with all those three guys on the court. That is an incredible record, and yeah, they probably could have won multiple championships if he stayed healthy and if Brandon Roy stayed healthy. And finally, the last player in this video is Yao Ming. Yao Ming, Shaq, Yao Ming was beating Shaq as a rookie. Shaq has a lot of respect for Yao Ming, and Yao Ming made the Hall of Fame after just 9 seasons in the NBA. And it was because he was in his last 2 seasons, he played only 6 games. So that's only 7 real seasons. Yao Ming was 7'6". He was dominant inside on both ends of the court, and he also had an incredible mid-range shot, and he only took 2 3-point attempts in his career, and he made both of them. Obviously, that's too low a sample size to say if Yao Ming was a great 3-point shooter, but he could still space the floor with his incredible mid-range jump shot. So Yao Ming, unlike other top players, he wasn't just tall, he also had skill, which he probably could have been a top 5 player of all time if not for injuries. Anyways, that's it for this video. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment down below what you think I should do for my next video. Also, I already mentioned this, but I might upload my 4th part or 3rd part. Yeah, I think it's my 4th part of my top 50 players in the NBA right now today. Make sure you have hit the notification bell so you don't miss that upload. Anyways, that's it for the video.